Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here, and today, guys, I'm here with another Total War Warhammer online commentary. In this battle, I'm going to be playing the Beastmen, and I'm going to be facing off against the foul Greenskins, so definitely a very savage matchup, and let's get right into the builds. So for my front line, I really actually like the Gore Herds as far as Beastmen frontline troops go. Gore Herds are okay, best Gore Herds are okay, but again, they're kind of like subpar for how much they cost, in my opinion. They have extremely low melee defense of about 20, but they have a pretty good charge bonus, a decent weapon strength at 42, but still, against the Greenskins, who usually bring a somewhat lightly armored front line, I think the Gore Herds are a pretty good choice. And in the most recent patch, I believe it was the Bretonnian patch, the Gore Herds actually did get a buff. So they used to have 31 weapon strength, but it's now 36. So still, I think they're one of the more viable choices for the front line. And as you can see, I have an entire front line of these bad boys. Aside from that, I did bring one Best Gore Herd in the back. So if you decided to kind of mix in like a single black orc or, had some sort of armored units, even like an Arachnarok Queen, even though that's not ideal, I wanted to have a little bit of armor piercing in conjunction with this Gorbel right here. So that's pretty much it for my front line. On both flanks, I do have some Ungor Spearman herds. I have one here and one here. So for example, if he has a superior cav force, and he actually has a really scary one, I believe he has like 2 groups of orc boars and some goblin big bosses, I can simply fall back with my cav and then use these spears to like kind of supplement my force and then turn that disadvantageous situation into, an advantage. Aside from that, I do have some Ungor Raiders, which, if the Greenskins decide to bring like a giant or anything like that has low armor and, high health and, things like that, they're pretty good for focusing them down. And it's just nice to have those ranged units. And they don't trade, that badly with like Durestiers and things like that. So 2 groups of these guys, and they do have stock, which is pretty neat as well. On top of that, I do also have a group of Harpies. Now, Harpies are great against the Greenskins. Firstly, the Greenskins usually don't field any air units, so you have complete superiority. You can fly wherever you like. You're not going to really be contested, and their missile units have very short range, so you're usually pretty safe. And they hit very hard. They have 44 weapon strength, and again, a lot of Greenskin units, including their cav. You can see they have 55 armor. The big ones over here have 50 armor. The giant has 30. They're going to do pretty good damage against everything, and even if he does get, the Flying Lord, I'm totally just like out of it right now. If he does get Azog the Slaughter, Azog only has 70 armor, which is a decent amount, but still a few groups of Harpies could actually do some pretty good damage to him. So aside from that, I do have 2 Centaurs. I didn't opt to get the great weapons. I was just saving a little bit of money. And like I said, and I've been repeating, the Greenskins don't have a ton of armor. And they usually don't bring Black Orcs in the Beastmen matchup. They'll usually bring like Savage Orcs or, Biggins or things like that. So they're a pretty safe pick there. Although the Arachnarok Queen can be something you need to worry about. So having some armor piercing, in the case of the Gorbel and the Bestigors, is definitely necessary. So for my opponent's army, he has a front line of Biggins, which is going to be pretty scary because Biggins, they will definitely, if I'm not mistaken, outtrade the Gore Herds. They have 42 weapon strength. They have a very small anti-large bonus. Let's go ahead and check here. I believe it's like 5 or 6. Yeah, it's actually 8. So against like the Cav, they can trade pretty well. They'll do well against Gorbels. Just a very, very solid, well-rounded unit. And they have pretty decent leadership for Greenskin units as well. So they do have 50 armor on top of that. So against the Gore Herds, they're going to mitigate somewhat, a decent amount of their damage. So his entire front line is indeed Biggins. In the back, he actually has something a little bit interesting, but, he actually played very well this game. So, and I do kind of like this tactic. So he has some Savage Orc Airboys, and Savage Orc Airboys do have the War Paint. So they, not the War Paint. Is it the War Paint? I forget what that mechanic is called. Yeah, I guess it just has physical resistance, but it's 30%, which is pretty huge. And basically, when they run out of arrows and have to fight, they're basically like Savage Orcs. They have very, very high melee weapon strength of 38. So even if I'm able to get around the flank with some Gores, these guys will not take any of their shit. So he does have 2 groups of those and just a regular group of Orc Airboys. In all honesty, I would have liked to see at least the Rusty Airs instead of these Orc Airboys. That armor sundering is just so incredibly good against Gorbels and pretty much anything. So aside from that, he does have 2 Goblin Big Bosses. He has 2 Orc Boarboy Biggins with the anti-large and armor piercing. He has the Hammer of Gork back here, which is definitely a solid choice. And of course, he does have Azog the Slaughter with Lore of Death. So he has Fate of Buna and Spirit Leech. Pretty standard protocol, but I don't believe he had the Spider Banner. So let's get right down to the business, guys, and have some fun. So, he did have the Hammer of Gork, so generally the player who does have the siege piece has the luxury of just kind of sitting there, but the angling here is a little bit awkward. There's this lip here, and there's also this tree here, so he's not going to have the best line of sight with that. Also, another mistake is I would like to see his missiles be a little bit deeper, because you guys see right here how they're like hugging the back of these troops. They're not going to be able to fire over that effectively, and if these were like powder units, for example, they would just be in, some pretty serious trouble. So I'm actually eager to see like how their firing angle is. But regardless, I am advancing up this way. So instead of like going straight on, because this lip right here, this little pit, you actually can't advance through here. So it actually splits your army. So I moved my entire army over here and I'm just going to kind of like take this ground right here and push up. And at the same time, I am getting my Centaurs, both of them out here, who actually did take some fire from the artillery. So my opponent does respond in kind by getting his Orc Biggins as well as these Orc Boards. Very, very well played. I love it when people do that. When they bring their cav and support with infantry, I just can't engage that. I would just get torn to shreds. But guys, this is what I really wanted to show you. So Azog the Slaughter actually uses a single Fate of Buna. And look at the damage it does to these Harpies. Just absolutely devastated, down to 700 HP. So literally, that Fate of Buna just destroyed an entire group of Harpies. Like, they just melted. Still, it does cost 16 Winds of Magic, which is very, very expensive. So basically, 16 Winds of Magic for about 500 resources, give or take. So some of my troops are taking some missiles, but I wanted to posture up completely before I went ahead and engaged. And I was trying to like bait him out because, again, as you guys have seen in many of my replays, a lot of people are going to get both groups of cav and are just going to chase you assuming they can win. Whereas with the Beastmen, you can then pull back using your superior mobility and, you know, counter with the spears and all these different infantry options. But still, he was very, very on top of keeping these Orc Biggins in support. He had Azog nearby. He was just very, very on top of that. So he wasn't giving me any easy engagements there. So in the front line, I am going to push in with my Gore Herds, and the Biggins are definitely going to have a field day. However, I do have Morker, the Shadowgave, as well as the Lure of Death with Soulblight. So I'm going to get a nice Soulblight, hopefully, on all of his troops. And I do have these 2 Ungor Raiders to focus down this Giant, which is going to be very, very nice, as well as these Ungor Spearman Herds. So over here in the front line, you can see it's a very wild, savage fight. You can see some of these Biggins kind of collapsing here. You can see the Soulblight is also going to be going down right here, kind of debuffing a lot of his troops. And he does have a lot of density here, but you can already see there's a ton of missiles pressuring this Giant. It hasn't taken a ton of HP damage yet, but it most certainly will. And the Gorbel with his anti-large bonus should be able to be very, very helpful there. Over here on the wings, you can see that my opponent is using these Biggins to kind of screen me out. So I kept these Gore Herds in auxiliary, and I was like, okay, I need to intercept these and then try and get a cav fight. But he also does have Azag here, who does cause terror. And he also has the Spider Banner, so he does have poison. So he's not going to be a pushover as it pertains to being a duelist. So the front line has engaged. I'm getting some very, very good healthy fire on that Giant. You can see my 2 Ungor Herds, or Raiders here, are coming over. In the front line, though, the Gore Herds actually aren't performing bad. They got the apocalyptic vision, but they are being supported by the Best Score Herd, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the Best Score Herd is right here. And you can see Azog's coming in as well to kind of clean up the flank. So we're both kind of clipping flanks. My opponent is kind of trying to clip this side, and I'm trying to overwhelm this side a little bit. And actually, the Best Scores weren't engaged there. So, you know, he's trying to like push and deal with my spears, because if he's able to deal with my spears right here, then his cav can have free range and just run me down. Because the spears, I really needed them to help win this fight, because he has 2 Orc Boars and he has leadership in there. He has a Goblin Big Boss and an additional group of Biggins. So I pulled the Best Scores over here. They're going to get a really good rear charge into the back of these guys, and you know, they do have really good charge bonuses, and for all the stats they lack in, like melee defense and their overcost, they have an excellent charge bonus, and they do have a lot of armor, so against Biggins they will perform pretty well. So they charge in there, do some really good shock damage. You can see massive casualties right out of the gates for those Orc Biggins, and they should be routed. So that was a great situation, because it allowed me to get my spears around without being pressured, and then kind of you know, dictate the pace of this engagement on the outside. Over here in the main battle, Morker actually does overextend a little bit, which was really scary. I had him pathed on this group, but they did fall back, and he does pull in with Azog. Thankfully, Morker does have regeneration, so it's not going to be that bad, and I immediately start to retreat. So over here in the main fight, I was able to just absolutely mop the floor with this flank. I do have some Gore Herds, 2 groups here, actually 3 groups of Gore Herds pushing in, and the Giant has just been getting peppered all day by these Ungor Raiders, and the Ungor Raiders doing very well, and you can see with that Soul Blight, it actually puts his armor down to 0, so he's really going to have no mitigation whatsoever. He does have his Savage Orc Arrow Boys here kind of protecting and shooting, but still at that point, the Giant does go down to the Ungor Raider fire. Those Biggins are doing pretty well against my spears and whatnot. That is a huge blow to my opponent. So he decides eventually just to kind of engage. So he pulls in his Orc Boar Boy Biggins here, just kind of getting impatient there, and I'm able to get a really good rear charge with my God, I'm just so out of it today, with the Centigores. So the Centigores charge in there, get a great rear charge on the back of these Orc Boar Boy Biggins, doing some excellent damage. The Hounds are coming in that second group also. So they're going to take a pretty big beating here, though they do have a very healthy group of Orc Biggins here, and another group of Orc Biggins coming in. Only 17 models, but still they'll make a pretty big difference here. And Morker is definitely something you don't want to target. He's incredibly tough to kill. Though his leadership is like kind of tanking up and down. With that regeneration, especially against like units like this, he's gonna last forever. So over here, my opponent does use another Fate of Buna. Very, very well played. Good targeting. So the Biggins obviously are going to struggle a little bit against that armor. But with Azog coming in and the Fate of Buna, you can see that these guys are going down pretty fast, taking some massive HP damage. The Ungor Raiders over here are still just having an unimpeded firing line the entire time. Against the Beastmen, I actually like to bring like a group of Goblin Wolf Riders or something, just to kind of like troll around them back and pressure them. The Harpies are actually coming back too, all 14 of them. So pretty wild stuff. But Morker down here is in a bit of a death match here with this Goblin Big Boss, fighting it out. But there are some Biggins fighting, but for the most part, a lot of my opponent's forces are pretty tattered. And I also did get some Chaos Spawn who are back into these Savage Orc Arrow Boys, but believe it or not, these guys will actually put up a decent fight, and they do have some Biggins coming back, so they should be able to clean up these Chaos Spawn pretty efficiently. You can see Azog thought about coming in there, but he has been getting Spirit Leech this whole game, and you can see the Harpies are actually coming back for vengeance right now. They're pretty pissed off about that Fate of Buna earlier, so As far as everything that's kind of going on in the battlefield, my opponent does have some Orc Biggins left. He has a Goblin Big Boss. Hammer of Gork is still firing. I don't think it did that well this game. Unfortunately, it only got 20 kills. I really don't like bringing siege pieces against the Beastmen because their army's so mobile and they just have so much stuff that it can be pretty inefficient in my opinion. The Gore Herds and the Best Gores are coming in. Just everything's starting to collapse in my opponent's forces. He does have these Orc Airboys left, but you know, for the most part, I think it's too little too late. And the Spirit Leech does get off on Azog, and that's definitely going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Just some general critiques of the game. I like the front line of Biggins. I think they're a pretty decent choice against Beastmen because if they do happen to bring like Minotaurs or anything like that, they're going to be good with their anti-large bonus. They perform well against most infantry, and most of the time, Beastmen aren't going to bring Bestigors against the Greenskins. So on that front, it was pretty good. A critique I would have had aside from that would be, well, I guess not aside, but a critique I would have otherwise is that the Rusty Arrows would have been really nice with some Goblin Archers to be able to focus down the Gorbel. I also would have liked to see, yeah, the outside situation was a little bit tough. Azog is a good pick, though. I do like Azog quite a bit. I think that Lore of Death is very good against beasts. Soulblight is pretty good. Fate of Boon, as you saw, took out like an entire group of infantry, or my Harpies before the fight started. And Spirit Leech is also pretty good as well. I would have liked to see some Spirit Leeches on my caster with my Lore of Death caster. I think that would have been pretty helpful as well. So, yeah, pretty fun battle for sure. And, you know, I like the performance from the Gore Herds. They did really well standing up to the Biggins. Granted, you can see the Biggins did pretty good for themselves, but they kind of just got overwhelmed. Those 5 Biggins engaged with 4 Gore Herds, and then the Gore Herds, or the Best Gore Herd here, were able to kind of clip the flank and push their way down. And that Giant, I'm not a big fan of the Giant. The Giant was like, he kind of like, you know, beat on some Gores for a minute. But imagine if you had that 1,600 resources to just throw in like 3 or 4 groups of Savage Orcs. That would have been a substantially harder battle in the front line. And my entire infantry line probably would have collapsed. Giants are good in some matchups, and granted, there can be a case made for them against the Beastmen because Beastmen typically don't bring a lot of missile pressure. But still, I think Giants are kind of more at home against like heavily armored factions like Chaos or Vampire Counts who don't have like a ton of ranged pressure and have more heavy armor. Because Giants, again, have huge armor piercing. You're going to get a huge benefit from that. Whereas if they're just hitting like high density groups like Ungor Spears and Gore Herds, it doesn't seem to be as effective. I definitely like the 2 Goblin Big Bosses, and you know, at the end of the day, he had very, very good play with his Cav. He was using those what's it called, and yeah, that was another thing. The Orc Biggins kind of had to like push out, so it left his main line kind of compromised. But the Orc Biggins, I like the play of sending them out with his Cav and not taking a risky engagement. That was very, very well played there. Definitely like that tactic, and it was good stuff. But again, well played to my opponent Vlad over there. I look forward to seeing you again on ladder, and hope you guys enjoyed this Beast cast. Have an excellent night, and take care.